Firstly, just to point out that we did invite a representative from Bord na Móna to join our discussion, but they declined. Eamon, Pat illustrates in the VT there how difficult it is to grow willow. If we end up ceasing peat harvesting by 2025, are we potentially looking at increasing our carbon footprint by importing biomass into the country?
Well, I don't think we should be using biomass in power generation at all. It's highly inefficient, and there are real environmental risks, not just here at home and the difficulty we've seen with Macanthus and with willow. And as I say, the volume wood that it would take if we were doing it through forestry plantations, we'd almost have to take our entire forestry system and just feed it into a power plant where 2/3 of the energy is wasted, goes up the chimney as waste heat. It's not a long-term, it's not a very efficient or economic solution to generating power. And I suppose the other alternative to get the volumes that would be needed is to go out of the country. Bord na Móna have been looking at going to Georgia and the States, I think it is, they wanted to buy a wild forest. And again, I just think that's not going to work. It's huge energy used in shipping it backwards and forwards. But also the Americans are starting to cotton on. That's what's happening. Their native wild forest is being chopped down to feed power stations in Europe. They're up in arms about it. It's not going to be viable. So I think we need to switch away from use of biomass in power generation. We can use it for certain very specific uses in heat, particularly in the food industry, in very advanced combined heat and power stations where it's highly efficient. Yes, there may be a need for it. But in big power stations where, as I said, 2/3 of the wood is wasted as waste heat going up a chimney, I don't think that is sustainable in any way.
So, Eamon, you wouldn't support peat as a form of fuel for firing the power stations, but as the alternative now, Bord na Móna look at biomass, and you also don't think that's a good move?
There's real environmental concerns. I mean, currently they're already needing dairy mixing in pine kernels. But again, from a global perspective, that pine kernels they're coming from Malaysia, Indonesia, where there's huge concern about the change of land use to provide these biomass materials. It's not sustainable. We have alternatives that are far more economic in terms of generating power. There's a huge opportunity, I think, need for us to switch and to create investment in Bord na Móna in renewable alternatives, in other business enterprise that the company should lead on. But burning biomass to generate electricity is not efficient, it's not sustainable, it's going to do real harm to our national image, not just meeting the climate targets or not. Increasingly we'll be seen as environmental pariahs if we pursue an approach that is actually destroying nature rather than protecting it.
So what's the alternative then?
Well, I think the investment...
For those power plants.
Well, I think one of the things you'd have to do with those power plants is use the grid connection, to which Bord na Móna are looking at doing now, for the likes of solar farms, the likes of wind power, and to use what's the asset, the real assets is that grid connection. I don't believe that the power plants have a future, unfortunately. We have to make sure that there's employment and that the company starts to thrive and that the Midlands start to thrive. But doing it on back of maintaining inefficient, expensive and unsustainable power plants isn't the way to go.
Michael, I'll bring you in there. The power plants don't have a future, Eamon says, and he doesn't see a likelihood on the biomass side either as a possibility to co-fire at them.
Well, as you are aware, Claire, over the last year, I've been to the fore in saying that first, it's uneconomical growing biomass in this country. We know that there's 3,000 acres being grown at the moment. We are aware that I think there's something like 500 acres after being put back into agricultural land for the simple reasons the economics don't stack up. That's the simple facts about it. How anybody could come to the conclusion that bringing palm kernels or bringing biomass from Australia or all these different countries we hear about, and basically cutting it there, chipping it there, bringing it using it in a factory there, getting it on a lorry to bring it to a port, bringing it to Ireland, how anyone could actually envisage that you'd be doing good for the world, I think established the need to people that's thinking that way, because it doesn't stack up, to be quite blunt about it. Where do we go? The reality of it is that because of the movements last week and the announcements, we are now sort of bounced 5 years sooner than what Bord na Móna was envisaged where it was going. What are the solutions? Next year, we are going to be 1 million tonnes less of peat, obviously. That's what they have agreed on. And what's going to replace it? So we haven't a magic wand that's going to replace it overnight. We are in trouble in the line of the biomass because that's what the focus has been on, even though it was pointed out. I would differ with Eamon in saying that regardless of what different alternative we go to, the problem is that it has to be subsidised and subsidised heavy. And I do have a problem with the wind energy sector where, look, there's an awful lot of the wind energy sector at the moment, unfortunately, is owned by Japanese business people. And we are looking, no more than when you look at your phone at the moment or broadband and all these other things that Ireland had control of their own destiny at one stage, we have now no control over even a lot of the different alternatives that's out there that people are looking at. And we are displacing 5 years sooner than it was envisaged. And I still urge Bord na Móna that in the rehabilitation of those bogs, that they shouldn't be laying off those expert machine people who have worked on those bogs for years. I think there's a rehabilitation that they can be doing. But on top of that, what we are doing, as well as talking about bringing biomass from all these different countries, we have a lot of those people working on Bord na Móna that everybody knows are part-time farmers that won't survive on the farm. That's the reality of it. For years, people knew this was coming, but there was no decisions made on how we are going to make sure they will have work. I sat in the AV room with Bord na Móna officials who said that nobody would be laid off, this is a few years ago, and said how we're going to have alternative jobs. But the alternative jobs are not there. The reality of it is go to Galway Port where they closed down, go to Sligo Port where they closed down their coal operations, now go to the Midlands. And it's the Midlands of an area that struggle for employment, unfortunately, that those machine drivers will probably end up, the younger ones of them, going to the likes of Dublin where there is work on machines that they would be used to. What's the carbon footprint of that? As well at the same time of bringing biomass from Australia. It's absolutely nonsensical what we're doing in this country.
Eamon, what's your view on that? So if we lose the peat industry out of the Midlands, biomass won't work, according to yourself, to fuel the power stations. That's going to result in a lot of jobs. There doesn't seem to be an alternative, as you're both pointing out, that really you feel is sustainable right now. This is coming down the track. 2025 is not that far away. Are we going to end up putting more people into cars to commute to jobs in urban centres, the likes of Dublin, which will lead to an increase in emissions on the transport side?
Can I just come in on one thing there? 2025 is coming down the track, but next March and April is coming down the track quicker, where 150 people are going to be getting redundancies. That's the reality.
Can I say, I think rural Ireland will thrive if we go green, in my mind. And Bord na Móna and the Midlands particularly should and will thrive. And I agree with Mike that we should have been planning for this much more aggressively and getting ready for it and in investing ahead of it. But firstly, I welcome the fact that Bord na Móna are looking at spending, it's 2 gigawatts, I think it is. That's half of the electricity we're using at the moment in Ireland. That's the scale of investment that they're planning of investing in renewables, in wind and solar. And that will be owned by the Irish people. And I think that's important, that we do have ownership of this amazing power supply we have, where we have a comparative advantage and where now it's increasingly cheap. The price of wind keeps coming down, the price of solar keeps coming down. So we can build that power and it gives us an advantage. And in fact, even on the back of that, we should be looking to put the likes of data centres into the Midlands. That Athenry plant, I really regret that didn't go ahead, because there you have a very low cost energy supply, creating that further jobs in the Midlands. Secondly, I think it's very important that as we restore our bogs and re-wet a lot of them, which can act as a carbon sink, that the communities in the Midlands get paid for that. There's real value now in these bogs in storing carbon. Rather than releasing it into the atmosphere, we can hold it there. And I think it's critical in how we do this, that the money that comes for that, because that has a real value, carbon has a value, that money goes back into the Midlands. And thirdly, critically, I think for the company, one of the huge tasks we have 1 million houses in this country with oil-fired central heatings. Typically, they're not very well insulated. We need to go into every single one of those houses in the next two decades and do 3 or 4 things. We need to retrofit them with insulation so that they're really cosy, warm and efficient houses. We need to put solar panels on the roofs. We need to put electric vehicle connection points in and a heat pump so that they're heated with this power supply we have. Now that's not going to be cheap. You're looking at about 25, 30 plus thousand for each house. But there's an incredible benefit in that your fuel bill vanishes. And I think we can get the financing for that to make it easier for the households to do it. Who's going to do it? I think Bord na Móna are perfectly placed to set up a really big division doing that work. They could employ thousands of workers. It's guaranteed for the next 20 years because we know we have to do it. It's the same skills. It could be very well paid. And I think what we need to be doing now is sitting down with the unions and others in the Midlands to say, okay, let's make this transition work for everyone, but particularly for the workers in that company. And let's plot out how we can use the skills it has in machinery and logistics and actually develop that business. And the truth is at the moment, I was down recently, we talked to the Tipperary Energy Institute, who are very experienced in this. They're saying the biggest obstacle at the moment is they can't get workers. There's actually a real dearth in the Midlands in workers who can do this sort of work, making our homes fit for the future. And I think Bord na Móna and the workers in the Midlands improving the houses in the Midlands, not commuting up to Dublin, but actually looking after our own homes. And because it's close to the wind farms, close to the solar farms that we're going to build, they should get cheaper power to run their car, to heat their home. That's the future we should be investing in for Bord na Móna.
But surely some vision like that would take a long time to actually achieve. And as Michael pointed out, you have job losses coming next March, and then beyond that, 400 up to 2025, and then after that, possibly more. So that's a very extensive vision that you have.
Yeah, but to meet the climate targets, we need to do it now. The government in their plans said by 2021, that's only 2 years away, we'll be doing 45,000 houses a year. Now, the truth is, we're not even doing 45 a year at the moment. What we should have seen in this recent budget was significant money going to Bord na Móna to allow them start doing it at scale, and to do it in the thousands of houses, not in the tens, fives and tens, which is what's happening at the moment. That needs to be scaled up anyway, because we're so far away from meeting our climate targets, and that's probably the best way we can cut out the pollution. And I think Bord na Móna is a perfectly suited company to lead it so that it's state-backed, so that you get scale, so you use the skills of the company, particularly the engineering skills that they have, to make it happen.
Michael, I know you want to come in. Michael, but firstly, just on the possibility of flooding the bogs, Eamon touched on it there, and using the bogs as a carbon sink. Are there challenges there in terms of the land around the bogs? Like, will there be an impact there if you flood a bog? Will that impact on farmers and on land around the bogs?
Well, the first thing you have to do, and look at in parts of the West, there is restoration of bogs being done, but there is an analysis that it's about the 3-year process. The likes of RPS are doing it at the moment. I know for the national parks, where you have to make sure that we call it the drain between the farmland and the bog, that's kept open. Up on the high bog, yes, there is, you can basically close drain for re-wetting. The word flooding may be sort of extravagant to sort of use the word. It's like re-wetting the top of the bog. But yes, but also there will be 200 metres to 250 metres on the edge that you won't be able to touch, for the simple reason there is a danger of farmers' land and having an impact on that. Second of all, I think there's a few things I want to talk about here. In the line of, when we talk about emissions, in Ireland, when you look at Ireland's total emissions, Bord na Móna weren't part of that. They were buying, the ESB had to buy for all the peat. They had to buy carbon credits on the markets the last few years. That's the first thing. So when we talk about reducing our emissions, unfortunately, that's not going to be part of it. The second part is that when you talk about renewables, in the line of wind and in the line of solar, well, just to correct the record, there is a lot of wind turbine operations in the west of Ireland. There's Quilcha's one that went into it, Bord na Móna have gone into it, and within 3 to 4 years, they have sold part of that business off. And that is fact. It's not that we own it. It is sold to foreign entities. So they that will be having the money out of it, they that are going to be getting the subsidies out of it, that's the facts, if you look at, I think it's something like 60% of our wind business at the moment is sold or is owned by people out of this country. On top of that, when you look at, and Eamon has talked about different ideas there of creating employment, when we go into the Dáil and we have budgets, we don't have a pot of money to give this, this and this, unfortunately. It would be great if we had. But the reality of it is, there are a lot of people, and when you talk about making better homes, and especially the older homes, at the moment, if you have a home that was built in 2006 or 7, you don't qualify for anything. That's the first thing. I actually talked to a person on my way up here this morning. Second of all, you need money. And this is what people need to get into their head. If you were an old age pensioner, if you were someone living in parts of rural Ireland, in a lot of disadvantaged areas, in Clore areas, in Reds areas, you were talking about the average income for farmers in that around 18,000 a year. To do a lot of the lovely things that Eamon has talked about, it would be agreed by everyone that you need 30 to 40,000. So you need 20,000 of a block of money along with the grant you get. So where is this going to come out of? No government is, like young people at the moment are trying to get mortgages for houses. They're being refused. I see them building houses down the country. It would be lovely to be able to go for them people for all these other alternatives. But the mortgage they're getting, they have to dance according to it and build what they can afford. And we will never solve the problem unless we have a realistic system of basically electricity. And in my opinion, and Eamon, you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but the stats that I have is that the last 4 hours, the last 5 years have been the worst in wind generation. I'm not talking about in overall generation, I'm talking about in the volumes of wind. Second of all, this year has been the second worst in history. We need security of fuel in this country. We are now in danger. Next year there's 1 million tonnes gone. The following year there's 1 million tonnes gone. Where are we going to just, for the next 10 years, and I've pointed this out over the last number of days, where are we going with making sure we have fuel security and making sure that we're not going to hit a bang?
So
and the other thing,
Portnamona's plan realistic?
in my opinion, we are sleepwalking into something. We are now this year at peak in the gas in Balmullet, yeah, and in 2025 it is envisaged that's gone. And we have some assets that's actually going to be gone by that. And we still don't know where we're going. We don't have a vision of what we're doing. And being honest about it, if we want to talk about this whole carbon situation in Ireland, and indeed the world, where we are here now, you could throw a stone over to the airport. No one is talking about the amount of emissions planes are putting up. Why don't we talk about the same as some of these people want to get rid of all the livestock in Ireland and cut down on this, that and other? Why aren't we talking about getting rid of planes? Ground them if we need to. Don't be going on your holidays if that's the case, if we're doing so much damage.
Eamon, there is a view out there that the pressure that is coming on to the rural, more indigenous sectors, the likes of agriculture, the likes of the peat sector, that it's being driven kind of by urban-centric views. There is that view out there, and that plays into that urban-rural divide. What do you make of that argument? Do you think that the people that are making these plans, that are involved in these policies, have a meaningful understanding and appreciation for rural industries and rural life and the importance of them, and that you can't just displace people from certain industries who are used to even, like you mentioned, the manual labour working outdoors, and then building, pharmaceutical factories or different plants or data centres, and bringing people who have that kind of work ethic in their blood and bringing them into a new sector where it's not.
Go back to what I was saying earlier on. I think going green is going to be good for Ireland, and he's absolutely right. We have to do it in urban areas as well as it's not any one section. Every section of society and every country is going to have to play its part. But for rural Ireland, this is an opportunity, because the current rural Ireland will make its living, in my mind, in 4 key sectors. Firstly, in energy. the resources actually exist stronger in rural Ireland. The wind is stronger, and it's still there. While it varies year to year, we're still probably the windiest country in the world. We have a real advantage over other countries. But also in terms of putting up solar power. Like, farmers have the opportunity on barns, in solar farms to do this in a way you can't do it in an urban area. And rural Ireland would also benefit from the electric vehicles, because it's much easier in a house in the country to connect in than it is in a street in Dublin, where it's very hard to get a charging point. But so the energy future is going to divert money to rural Ireland, and it's our resource. It's not paying it to Russia or to Saudi Arabia, which is what we're doing at the moment. We're sending our money overseas to buy our energy. Instead, it'll be having our own energy here. But secondly, food. I mean, the current food system needs to change. It's not serving Irish farmers. Like, I mean, out of 130,000 Irish farmers, there's about 15,000 are earning an income. 115,000 are below poverty levels under the current system. Now, we need to change that system where we value the work that farmers are going to do. They're going to be the frontline key people in adapting to climate change and helping us mitigate against it. And that means paying farmers better for food, but also for storing carbon, also for protecting wildlife, also for managing floodwaters, also for providing access. And if you look at the new Common Agricultural Policy, that's what it's all about. It's saying pay your farmers for the environmental services that they're providing. They're the heroes in this tight game we have to do. Thirdly, though, just two other points. We will make our money in rural Ireland from tourism. We know this already. It's already happening. I know I worked in tourism, bringing people to the most rural parts of Ireland for 15 years. People coming here want to connect to a landscape that is truly green and is beautiful. And so for rural Ireland, that is a key benefit. Lastly, and go back to that data centres issue, we do need to provide the rural broadband to make sure that we can get digital services, because we have an advantage potentially in rural Ireland down the line. If you can get that sort of digital connectivity, that it's not costing 2,000 or 3,000 euros a month, which is costing at the moment in Dublin to rent an apartment. You have the potential to live in a place where housing is more economic and you can still connect to the internet. So those four legs of the stool are the future of rural Ireland, and they all, in my mind, benefit from us being green and efficient in everything that we do.
Michael,
there are just a few things there. Being honest about it, Eamon, and for anybody that put the solar panels for even heating the water in the houses, it's like a 10-year plan ahead of you. Solar panels haven't proved themselves yet. We have to live in realistic terms. Wind, there is problems with wind in the countryside as well, because people don't want wind turbines looking out when they look out their back door, simple as that, and they will be objected to, and that's it. On top of that, whether we like it or whether we don't, if we're going down this world that you talk about, Eamon, and many others talk about, electricity prices will have to go up by probably 9 cents per unit. And that's being realistic. Now, can we afford that? We know that at the moment that coal is the cheapest form of electricity. Okay?
No.
Well, that's the facts of it. Yeah. It's way cheaper than any of the other products that you talk about. And gas is cheap. Nuclear is the cheapest of all, but we're not going to go down that road. Second of all, for manufacturing companies in this country, if you want to keep the jobs, and have a look at the likes of Mayo, we have great success with the likes of McHale's and Major and all these different companies who need to be competitive at what they're doing. You're correct in saying we need the broadband infrastructure, but if we go down the road of basically farmers just having an ice raised bog to look in at, an ice field to look in at, managing the floodwater, well, they may as well live in Dublin, because you'll have a desolate, abandoned rural Ireland. All you will have in it, in what you're talking about, is wind turbines, and we have to watch as well that if the rock off, if we go to 80% or 90% in wind energy, we have to watch the rock off, which will cost near $1 billion, to make sure the generators can accept that, because obviously wind is variable up and down. We haven't planned where we're going. We are in a maze for the next 10 years. Yes, things will come along. In the line of electric cars, there's a big question mark out there. Where is the batteries going to be disposed of? How long will it take before they're actually carbon neutral? Some are saying up to 10 years. I don't know, but there's questions out there that we have decided that we're going to plunge headfirst into the sea without knowing how to swim, And there's going to be consequences over the next 10 years because we haven't a sort of a level plan brought going forward.
I'm going to have to leave it there, I'm afraid. Eamon, I know you want to come in, but we're out of time. Thank you both very much for coming into us.